Hello, everybody, and welcome to a lovely opportunity that I've been really excited about here at Peace in Schools to talk with two of my favorite people. So let me tell you a little bit about what this conversation is about. So Peace in Schools had the good fortune to recently attend the Ford Foundation convening for mindfulness, youth, and justice. And two of the folks that we met there are going to be on this call, and we're going to be just continuing the conversation about what our experience was, just in a kind of casual, friendly way. So Peace in Schools, we're bringing just a lot of attention and dedication to understanding and integrating like how our role in schools and in working with youth is integrating social justice. And so there were lots of incredible and inspiring conversations about that at this convening, which featured about 20 mindfulness in education organizations from around the country. And the collaboration and I think just the sense of community that was built was really inspiring. So we're here today to share a little bit of that, what happened there and why we're so inspired by it. And I'll sort of pause it here and give everybody a chance to introduce ourselves. So on the call, we have Dr. Sará King and Jahlisa Forcheney, and we're coming together from all around the country. So perhaps we could just take a moment to each introduce ourselves. So I'll turn it over to you guys to start.
Okay.
You can start, Sarah.
Okay. That was a wonderful introduction, Barnaby. And yes, I'm speaking here from Long Beach, California. And I have an organization called Mindheart Consulting. And in my organization, we offer research and development and workshops and seminars that are grounded in a framework that I've developed called the science of social justice. And that was one of the reasons why I was so excited to come to the Ford convening, because I think that within the scientific community that youth are oftentimes left completely out of the conversation unless they are being the subjects of research, which I think is pretty unempowering and disenfranchising, because the youth are incredible bastions of knowledge and of creativity and of energy. And I also think that something that I've encountered in the conversation around mindfulness is that there are a lot of older people who are involved, especially in the scientific community, around defining what mindfulness is about and how mindfulness is practiced, and who is involved in practicing it and what it looks like. And youth are often left out of that conversation as well. So I was just so excited to meet Jahlisa, especially because she was one of the very, very few young people who had been invited to that particular convening. And she was just so radiant and intelligent, and the things that she had to offer to the conversation would have really been sorely missed. And so I'm just very excited to be on this phone call today and to have our voices in this space together and to see what bubbles up for us.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So I'm Jahlisa, and I'm a part of the organization, and I mentioned that I started practicing, or I started the program there when I was 16. And what we do is learn what mindfulness is and how we can apply it to ourselves. And we're learning through creative ways, through art, through music, through meditation, through movement. And from that program, I've been stemming off to my own personal practice and wanting to acquire more knowledge about what mindfulness truly is and how it changed my life from my personal understanding and how I can spread it to my community. So that's me.
Thank you. Just taking a couple notes there.
That was beautiful.
So yeah, my name's Barnaby Willett, and I've been with Peace in Schools for 5 years. My title, which it is Director of Innovation and Partnerships, and I made that up because I kind of liked that it touched on the partnership side. So currently I am working with like the school district in Portland and the principals to help implement our program and collaborate. And then also partner on the research side, such as with our research partner, Johns Hopkins University, and our researcher who's partnering with us, Gia Naranjo Rivera. And I had innovation in my title because I think looking at the question that you both brought up, like what is mindfulness and how it's being brought into education, is it's like a question that's blooming and emerging. And I think like this conversation here is part of this exploration and collaboration and understanding as to what is mindfulness in education and how do we do it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And I think that another thing that I'd like to mention is that you and I, Barnaby, prior to having the opportunity to go to the Ford convening, were in conversations with and correct me if I'm wrong, Caberly Morgan is the founder, and head teacher at Peace in Schools. Is that correct?
Yeah, founder and guiding teacher is the official title. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so you, the three of us had been in conversation around what this relationship was in our thinking, potentially around mindfulness and issues of social justice. And so, you know, I remember we were having this conversation around like the different ways in which particularly youth of color or queer youth have around just authentically expressing themselves and what matters to them, you know, whether these are like cultural expressions, kind of like what you mentioned, Jahlisa, whether these are like art forms, music, it could be hip hop, it could be freestyling, it could be skateboarding, it could be really any way that the youth have of expressing themselves. Mm-hmm. And how oftentimes there may not necessarily be free spaces for self-expression within schools. Mm. And, you know, Jahlisa, I'm kind of wondering if you've ever experienced anything around this or if any of your peers have, but I know that like when I was a youth, especially in high school, there were times when I was either really going through something or I was just doing something to express myself. And I felt that I was kind of called out or penalized by my teachers or by administrators in a way that was not necessarily helpful to my development, in a way that was traumatic, or that basically was applying an expectation upon me that I hold back from expressing myself mm-hmm. and being free within the school space. And so Barnaby, you and Caberly and I were in conversation around like, does the mindfulness practice have the opportunity to allow people in positions of power, like administrators or teachers, to become more self-aware of the ways in which maybe the ways that they're responding towards youth might not always be in support of their freedom of self-expression, especially like when this comes to issues of culture or issues of trauma or something like that. And I wonder, Jahlisa, have you experienced, like what your experiences have been at your school, either with feeling like not 100% free with expressing yourself, or maybe you've had the opposite experience and you have felt like your mindfulness practice has opened up that space for you.
Okay, so I can relate this to both high school and college. For college, I was actually introduced to, high school, I'm sorry. In high school, I was introduced to yoga and mindfulness there. Well, actually not mindfulness, just yoga. And it wasn't like a class that everyone went to. It was an elective, and a lot of people were not informed about it. And I took the class, but I took it for granted. So later, out of my freshman year, I started going through troubles at home and personal image problems. Like, I couldn't see myself as a strong, confident person. I started to tear myself down, and the environment and the people around me were not necessarily supportive of my lack of understanding my own self-worth. And I'm not saying anyone's responsible, but from my deep diving into my own practice, I realized that it's essential to feel that sense of support and understanding from, I guess you could say, people who feel like authority in the school system. And I didn't feel that. I felt alone. I felt hopeless. I felt like the weird girl. I felt crazy for evaluating my own feelings. And it was just not a topic that was normalized. Not until my last year of high school, where I started speaking courageously and boldly about how mindfulness is radical. And that didn't happen until I joined AYP. So that was outside of the school, but my school knew about the program. And in college, I won't talk too much about it, but for the most part, I went to a Catholic school and I took Buddhism and I took yoga electives, most of the same classes I took in high school, but it felt so superficial. It didn't reach deep enough to reach the person and to reach their needs, if that makes sense.
Could you, I wonder, like, I really appreciate you saying that. Could you say maybe a little bit more about what is radical about the lived experience of the mindfulness practice as opposed to perhaps just reading about mindfulness or even Buddhist philosophy or yoga within a textbook?
I started by reading, but I noticed I was reading and I wasn't like applying it to anything real that was going on in my life. But once I don't know if it was a personal thing or if it was my teachers who influenced me to dig deeper. So the reason I'm saying that is because how can I say this? There needed to be immediate experiences for me to apply the practice to. So those experiences, like being bullied and not feeling worthy enough, like those were the thoughts that were most prominent or dominant in my thinking pattern. And my teachers were able to get me to understand that that is a thinking pattern that I need to try to break by focusing on sounds or music or, you know, whatever can help me change that thought and make it into something helpful rather than negative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, couple of things in what you're saying, Jahlisa. There's like seeing that pattern and then like breaking it. Like I've thought of this expression for like breaking the chain, you know, that chain of thoughts, right? Or that train of thoughts.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so something was coming up for me in what you were sharing, Jahlisa. What I was seeing was like this awareness of there's like our relationship with ourself, and it's like how can mindfulness be supportive for being in, like, let's say in like right relationship with ourself and even like our thoughts and our emotions, and then kind of dialing it back one level, then there's like what is the relationship of those who are around us to us, whether it's like family or, you know, teachers or administrators. And it's like if, or teachers, and I'm thinking like mindfulness teachers, and if those relationships can be sort of supportive and awakening, and also be coming from a place of like illuminating our own self-worth, as you were saying, as like key. I was just thinking like how one relationship then affects the other, you know, and when that the dynamic of that relationship is shifted or centered in love and wisdom, then that can just open up so much for a being, for a person.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that if I may share my immediate reflection on both what you're saying, Barnaby, and as well as you, Jahlisa, and looping the conversation back around to a social justice-based perspective, and then also from a scientifically grounded point of view, oftentimes youth of color, marginalized queer youth in this country, but then we also can't forget that white identified youth who are in poverty also suffer from in their own way from marginalization. And there's a huge swath of white identified youth who are in very impoverished rural areas who have a lot of lack of access and who feel their own degree of disempowerment. But when you're being bullied, and being bullied can be, you know, within the home, being bullied can be by your friends and your peers and your communities. I personally experienced being bullied by administrators at my school from all the way from elementary school through high school. And then also, I think that we live in a social culture where many politicians and institutions are behaving as like within a larger macro state realm of bullying in terms of how they are asserting themselves over groups of people of color who are marginalized and really actively participating in policy making that is stripping away our rights and freedoms to be able to have access to the resources that we need and to live freely, to thrive. And that, in my opinion, has a really deep, not just in my opinion, also scientifically speaking, it has a really deep-seated impact on the nervous system. Because when you're being bullied, and I wonder what you think about this, Jahlisa, but like when you are in a state of being bullied, you're in constant fight or flight. You're in survival mode because you your body is finely attuned from an evolutionary point of view to know when it's being threatened. And like maybe that source of threat, it can be, you know, larger and from the society, it can be within your school, it can be within your home, and then eventually growing up within an environment like that, the threat can be in your own mind. And the way in which, like your own self-talk, you know what I mean? Like how, like when you were describing, like struggling with self-esteem or bullying, the bully eventually really is within your own mind. And it's almost like the bully in your mind is having a conversation with the bully out there in the world, and then you're like trapped between a rock and a hard place. And it can start to feel very, in my experience, inescapable. So to me, mindfulness, when taught to youth of color or to like marginalized people, is a very powerful act of social justice, because we are some of the people who have been enduring for centuries and centuries many different levels of bullying, so to speak. And it has like ingrained itself in the way that we think about ourselves and in our self-worth. So in my own personal practice, applying loving kindness and self-compassion and self-awareness has been this really powerful tool of undoing centuries of ancestral trauma from living within this country, really.
Wow. So, I guess to reflect on that, I'm beginning to feel like almost accidentally I'm a part of a cause or something that's just bigger than me or bigger than I thought, bigger, just big. And I don't know, I feel so inclined to keep on doing the work to learn what I need to learn in order to really make this topic applicable, you know? Yeah.
Bigger than you, like, I wonder, how do you have a sense for?
I mean, I just mean like it's not just me who's felt this feeling or who's felt this pain. It's not just me who wants to fix it in a way, to make it something new, to transform, you know? It's not just me. There's a bigger community of people who are aware of this and the struggle and want to do something about it, you know? Yeah.
Definitely. Barnaby, how about you in terms of, I've always been curious, I haven't heard a lot from you in our conversations in terms of as a teacher of mindfulness within schools. And then also I've heard some from you about your own personal kind of grappling with your identity as, well, I won't go so far as to say for you what your identity is, but I was wondering maybe if you care to share what's going through your mind about your own relationship to social justice and mindfulness as a teacher in schools.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So, you know, when again, like keying off of that word relationship and what I was mentioning earlier, so if you dial it one level out from, you know, this, let's say the youth and then the teacher, and then like for the system or the culture or the air that we breathe. And as you so kind of clearly pointed out, Sarah, there's a toxicity has been the nature of that system and that air. It's just like it's like the default mode has been one of conditioned and oppressive like systems and actions and behaviors that, and I love that kind of simple analogy of like bullying that has happened, and then that is internalized. And so for me, like identifying as a white male, part of my own personal journey in these last few years as I'm building my own like racial literacy or my own learnings around my privilege, there's, I would say, both an awakening to, and then I would say it's like it's almost like a plant where the leaves like open up, or the flowers open up, but then I also notice like a closing process in myself. So I think as my sort of own learning or awakening around social justice and its connection to mindfulness happens, I can see as a white person the ways that I both am awakening to a deeper sense of empathy and seeing of what others' lived experience is. And I also notice my own internalization of whiteness in the sense of just wanting to, or of ignoring or avoiding or rationalizing, etc. So, it's often said that in conversations, let's say around racial equity, a baseline is just being open to discomfort. So part of this, I think it's a process both of joy and discovery and also discomfort.
So just a question, I feel curious to know, what do your two like personal practices look like, and how do you bring it to schools?
Yeah, well, for me, in answering that question, my personal practice began when, let's see, I had just gotten out of college, and during my senior year of college, I had experienced a lot of very traumatizing events, a lot of loss within my family. And I went to a very small liberal arts college in the Inland Empire in California called Pitzer College. And I was one of very few African American students on campus. And I was also I'm pretty sure the only student on campus who was technically classified as homeless the entire time that I was there. And most of the students who were attending there with me came from very wealthy, white identified backgrounds. And so there was a certain degree of, and I think also having gone to schools for the majority of my lifetime, I would say preschool through junior high school, I was usually one of the only African American students in my entire school. And then I went to high school, fortunately in Compton. And so I thank my lucky stars for that experience, because I was really able to, I'll say, come to an understanding and to be able to integrate a sense of my own Black culture and respect for how I express my Blackness within that space. And I don't know that I would have been able to harness that power of pride in my Blackness and in my my culture if I had gone straight from like preschool all the way through college and, you know, just surrounded within white culture and not really being able to have a sense of grounding within that. But also, I know that my experience being an only in a lot of these spaces, I had to grapple with a lot of internalized racism. I really felt that I struggled with feeling worthy of being able to attend these spaces. I struggled with just having my viewpoint and my culture represented within the classes that I was taking. I struggled with feelings of belonging, feeling a sense of connection with my ancestral background, and just plain feeling beautiful. It was very hard for me a lot of the time to like understand the power of my own just ancestral beauty. And so all of this got wrapped up into what I'm describing as it was like a very felt internalized experience of white supremacy and racism within my body. And then going through the trauma that I mentioned in my senior year, when I left college and I was introduced to the mindfulness practice, even though I was practicing in predominantly white Dharma spaces, I was very clear that the mindfulness practice for me was about unraveling this legacy of the trauma of white supremacy and oppression, systemic oppression within my own body that had me feeling so ashamed and depressed and chronically anxious. And like, I used to have this feeling like I was in just like a constant pressure cooker, and it was relentless. There was a lot of emotional pain, a lot of physical pain that I was navigating. And even though I wasn't really aware of it at the time, I think I was really hungering and thirsting for mindfulness practice that were taught in a way that really spoke to my own cultural background. But I mean, I was only 20 at the time, and that was 15 years ago. And, you know, I was very new to mindfulness, and I had no idea that it was even possible to speak about mindfulness practices in a way that was specific to people like myself. So fast forward, once I was in my PhD program, and I had been practicing mindfulness and yoga for, if you think about it, maybe about a decade at that point, maybe less. But when I saw the very recursive, and by recursive, I mean, it, like, to me, the healing process is very cyclical. So I saw these like cycles of healing that were occurring inside of myself. And then I asked around in my department, I was in the education department, and I asked, is mindfulness happening in schools? Is yoga happening in schools? And if so, what does that look like? Who is it being taught by? Who are the students that are receiving it? And when I asked around, at that time, the research was really in its infancy. Hardly anybody was doing any like serious, dedicated work, especially when it comes to looking at the experiences of youth of color like you, Jahlisa, who were being offered these practices within schools. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that my dissertation might have been the first to tell the story of youth of color who were undergoing a mindfulness and yoga practice within their school. And so in terms of answering your question, Jahlisa, what does it look like in terms of me bringing the practices into schools? I would say that my role thus far has been to go into schools and be a person, like a liaison of sorts, who can be in relationship with students who are participating in these interventions, And because being in a doctoral program gave me some position of power, to tell these stories to the broader public. And also, I think being a Black person, and there really aren't that many Black research scientists. I mean, just to be honest, just to be real about it, I immediately sensed that there was a way in which these students trusted me and respected me, because I wasn't coming to them as an outsider to just mine information and not sharing any kind of like cultural competency or any kind of lived experience with them. I think that they really sensed where my heart was at in terms of, I really understood how important their stories were, because their stories weren't being told. Like stories like people just like you, Jahlisa, your story is of incredible value in our broader society. And I think it's a shame that there aren't enough spaces where stories like yours are being prized and are being spoken about in terms of, here is a model, here is something that here is a story, here is a person who really needs to be listened to, because your story is reflecting the experience of so many other youth of color in this country who are really devalued and disrespected constantly and treated as though, I mean, your worth is based on being a consumer, like where you can spend your money maybe, or your worth is in, I don't know, the culture that's constantly mined and stolen from you. But rarely are youth of color, such as yourself, spoken about in terms of how they are contemplative and how they are actively working on healing themselves. And through healing themselves, they are also passionate about healing their communities and their families and being a model for social justice in a way that is, it looks different than getting out in the street, and protesting. It's different. It's a different approach to social justice, I think.
Yeah.
But it's just very valuable. So that would be the way in which I have had a role in schools thus far.
Wow.
Anything you want to reflect on that, Jahlisa?
I'm not sure. I just feel so much light from that. Like, I feel like my awareness has been personally devalued by myself because I have not been in places where what I feel and what I believe I know or what I do have evidence for is valued. So to hear you, Sarah, say that, it's just like the beginning of something new for me. Yeah.
I appreciate that. I think both Barnaby and I really deeply appreciate that. And it's also very regularly saddening to me that youth like yourself have to wait so long and to go through so much, as I'm sure you have, to just be in a space where it is crystal clear what your value is to the world and to society. And so it's just really wonderful that we have the opportunity to create that space here now.
Yeah, I'll briefly say, I mean, I kind of, when I'm responding to this question of my role as a teacher, you know, I'm just present to wanting to stay attuned to what's just been shared and speak from that place. And so what feels to me as like my practice or my role as a teacher is to be returning to the heart and returning to possibility. And I think also my role and my learning is how also to be conscious of what creates limitation and what blocks possibility and opportunity. So that's why I'm so excited to be in a conversation like this. I feel like what was so deeply meaningful to me about being part of this convening was to feel that I was part of a broader mindfulness and education community, that when we come together and look at all these questions that have emerged in this call, and I'll be specific about some of the areas we focused on in that convening, so equity, social justice, fundraising, best practices, and secularity. I felt that when these beautiful minds and hearts had the space to be together, I felt like we were on the verge of something new, like you were speaking to from your own experience, Jahlisa. I felt collectively that this coming together laid the groundwork for like real transformation to emerge. And it touched me deeply that when I spoke to someone who was in a small collaborative group within that convening that I was part of, you know, when the conference was over and we're exchanging contact info, and I'm someone who's a bit introverted and is always a little apprehensive about imposing on other people. But I said, you know, oh, it'll be great. You know, we'll have a Zoom call. We'll continue the conversation. And this person said to me, you know, Barnaby, this isn't going to be one call or a couple calls. This is like a decades-long collaborative work that we're all doing together. And to me, that really spoke to what that convening meant to me.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I was thinking maybe we could like wrap it up with like each one of us, we could say something, we don't have to, but something that we took away from the convening, and what do you hope to do with it now? Or we could have a different closing, but like it would be nice if we all just said something.
I think one thing that really struck me about the convening, and this ties a bit into what you were saying, Barnaby, about possibilities. I know Dan Siegel always likes to talk about the plane of possibility, and how we are able to, using our human creativity and our minds and our hearts, move ideas into actuality. And in the past, I am aware that I have had an inner monologue or dialogue, or who knows how many voices are in my head, that says, it said something like, you are all alone in what you're thinking. You are all alone in what you're passionate about. You are all alone in where you think change needs to start in the world, etc., etc. And it's kind of funny how we can all have these voices in our heads that we know cognitively, well, that can't be true. Like, how could I be alone? There's billions of people out here. Surely there are people out there who, share my passions, who share my dreams, and who are driven and motivated around healing and social justice in the same way that I am. But it was interestingly easy for me to be in that place and to think, well, yeah, there's people in these organizations out there, but how will I ever meet them? And how will we share space? And how could we ever put our ideas and thinking together? And also, given everything it seems like as humanity, what we're up against, I also had the thought, I'm just this one person with my little ideas, and how are they going to affect change really in the long run in the world? And I think at the Ford Foundation convening, I'll be the first to say I felt really special, like super special to be in that group, to be in that room. I felt like this idea that I had that I was alone was dashed to bits. It was just like proven completely wrong, because the whole time I was there, I kept looking around the room and thinking, well, if we're here and we share the same dreams and passions, there has to be way more people out there who just for whatever reason didn't get to come this time around. And so my perspective was really broadened in terms of the tribe that we are ultimately a part of. And so that is what I would like to share in part. And also, I was really left wondering how different the conversation would have been if there were 5 more youth in the room, 10 more youth in the room, if it had been 50-50 youth and mindfulness organization leaders. And then also, if 1 or 2 of the people who had ultimately been facilitating the conversation were youth, what would that look like maybe for the future of this conversation? That is what I'm left wondering. And I'm also left knowing that Jahlisa is going to be a big part of this shift in equality, because that's one of the ways in which youth are marginalized, is they're left out physically of these spaces, or there's like, they're tokenized, like there's 1 or 2, but they're not given the real seat at the table in terms of the decision making around the event or who's facilitating. So I'm left with a lot of pride and a lot of hope and a lot of faith in Jahlisa, because knowing that there is a Jahlisa, there's a lot more youth like Jahlisa out there who are waiting for there to be included, and they might go ahead and make their own dang table if we don't give them a seat. So, that is my big.
I really resonate with that. Like, I was thinking on the flip side of what you just said, like, my takeaway is that I am valued, like when I first got the email, I was thinking, wait, this must be wrong. Why am I being invited to this? And then when I got there, it was just like, everything was okay. I was equally heard. I was equally respected. And it was liberating, and I felt at home. And I'll also take away with me how important it is to define mindfulness. Like, for me, it's like I'm still understanding what mindfulness is. And I feel like the closer I come to understanding the truth of it, or how it could be truly life-changing, the better I will be at giving or teaching or helping or having other people who are like me understand how they too have access to something that's free, and that could change a lot. So that's my takeaway. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, you used that word liberation, and that phrase you brought in earlier, Jahlisa, mindfulness is radical. And I love holding that question, like as a question, like what is mindfulness? You know, it's almost, there's more power in that question than in the definition, in any limited definition of the mindfulness. And you know, mindfulness is radical, then I'm thinking of like, what is radical mindfulness? Mindfulness that's liberative, and radical as representing going to the root of mindfulness, to the depth of it. Well, folks, I am going to thank you sincerely for just making time in your busy lives. And I want to also do a shout out to IB.me, Inward Bound Mindfulness Education, for their magnificent efforts in organizing the Ford Foundation convening, and also to the Ford Foundation for just the really meaningful support and offering their space for it, because we really hope this could happen again. And I really hope that they know that all the work they put into it is really paying off. So just thanks to both of those orgs. And yeah, any last words either of you would like to say?
Thank you. Thank you guys so much. Yeah.
Thank both of you. And I completely echo what you said, Barnaby, about thanking IB.me and the Ford Foundation. And to anybody who is listening to this, I would like to do a little bit of a shout out to IB.me's first Youth of Color Mindfulness Retreats. I believe that the registration is open for that. And Barnaby, when you said, you know, well, what is radical mindfulness? That's what it is to me, you know, like radically inclusive spaces of healing for populations who, you know, are so like hungry and deserving of it. So yes, thank you both so much, and just much love to everyone.
Thank you, everybody. We hope to talk again.
All right, talk soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.